Hello everyone, welcome back to your research method journey. This is Yujie Hu, and today we are going to talk about research philosophies. Okay, and by the time you are watching this video, I'm sure you have already learned a lot about methods and methodologies. You already know about various methodologies that you can use to conduct research, whereas philosophy or research philosophy, to be specific, it is the grounding theory which underpins the methodology that you'd use or you want to use for any research that you want to conduct. So it is a bit of hidden element underpins the methodology or the method, the most obvious element that you would see when you are doing a research. For example, let's say you want to use a survey to conduct your research. Well, that survey is the method that you are going to choose, and survey itself is the element that actually shows to people. Whereas why choosing the survey? What's the theory behind? And that's the thing that you are going to learn from today's lecture, which is on research philosophy. So it is the founding theory, it is the guiding framework which underpins the method that you would choose. Okay, so I would give you more sense of it by the time that we talk more about the philosophy. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about some key concepts around philosophy, and that would include ontology, epistemology, methodology, and we would also compare them with methods that you're probably most familiar with. And then in the second part of the lecture, we will talk about some popular or famous, some of the most famous philosophies used in research, which are positivism and interpretivism. And we'll also introduce another one called critical realism. These three are the most common ones used by students in the past years in your dissertation. And finally, I'd like to invite you to participate in 2 exercises that I have designed to help you and test how much you understand the terms that you've learned today. Okay, let's go to the first part, which probably is the most difficult part, and not only for today's lecture, but also for the whole research method module. It is believed to be the most difficult part, which is on those terms. I'm not sure how many of you have studied these terms before, but anyway, I'll try to explain those terms in a simple and more understandable way, and I'll give you a couple of examples, hopefully that they will help your understanding about these difficult terms. Okay, and this graph here shows a relationship among these 4 terms. Okay, and so the most important and the fundamental concept here is called ontology. Ontology is about what the world is, and the study of reality, what reality is, what the thing is. Okay, I'll just briefly introduce them here, and later I will talk in details on each of these terms. So we have the ontology, which is about what the world is, and epistemology is on how we know what we know. It sounds a bit complicated, isn't it? And the methodology is about the way that we try to know something, the overarching strategy that we can use to understand something. And the method is usually the most obvious element, which is the actual technique that we use to conduct research. Don't worry if you don't understand them now. We will gradually unfold those terms in today's lecture. Okay, so here is also a graph and talking about showing that the relationships among the four terms. Similarly to the previous slide, which is kind of a more linear relationship. So I put two graphs here to show actually the same thing. And the reason I put two types of kind of relations or graphs here is because I think different students may have a different preference on how you learn. Some may learn better in a linear way, some may learn better in a kind of this more kind of visual and graph, or close to reality way. So here this graph is a tree, it's a tree trunk. Okay, so here if you're more kind of a visual learner, you may find this graph more understandable. And we know that in a tree trunk, they have layers and layers and layers. And from an outsider's viewpoint, the thing that we could observe from a tree trunk, if we don't cut the tree, is only the bark, the very outside, and the ring, very outside layer, isn't it? We can only see the bark. Whereas the inside, unless we cut the tree, we do not see them. But these, the thing inside, actually are more important here. And so here, as you can see from this graph, the very core in the middle is the ontology. It is the study of reality, or the study of the world, what the thing actually is. And we have a second layer, the second ring, and epistemology is the way, or the theory of knowledge. It is about the way how we know what the reality is, what the ontology is. So these two concepts, the ontology and epistemology, these two concepts are usually very, very close to each other. If you read a book on any philosophy, research philosophy, you would probably encounter with these two terms, ontology and epistemology. And each philosophy would have their own ontological assumption and epistemological assumption. Anyway, we will talk about them later. And the third ring, and we move outward, is the methodology. So the methodology is the overarching strategy that we would use to know about the what the thing is, or to know about what the reality is, what the knowledge is. So the methodology is kind of towards to the more obvious or noticeable range there, methodology. And finally, the method, the bark part, the very outside ring of the tree trunk. The method is the actual method or technique, we would say, that you would use to conduct research. So things like surveys, questionnaires, interviews, these are the actual technique, these are the method, so the very outside layer. Okay, I hope they started to make some sense to you about the relationship of these four concepts, very important concepts. Okay. Right, and now I'm going to talk about these concepts one by one. Well, before I start to talk about these terms in much more detailed fashion, and now I want you to look at this image here and on this slide, thinking about what it is. Okay, thinking about the question, what it is in this image. And you can now pause the video and think about this question, what it is in this image. Okay, right. I think you should have an answer in your mind, although I couldn't hear, since this video is pre-recorded. And well, from my previous interactions that I had with my students in the previous years, when I asked them this question, they came out and answers, but very kind of diverse answers from different perspectives. And the most popular answer from my students was a pyramid, or not a pyramid, but we have a couple of pyramids, right? In the middle of this image, we can see a desert, we can see a camel, a human being, and a couple of pyramids. So these pyramids, that could be one reality. Okay, so what we are studying here, it could be we are studying the pyramid. Alternatively, it could be that we are studying the stones. So it doesn't have to be a pyramid or the shape of a pyramid. It could be, we are studying the stones. Or it could be these are no longer about some natural science stuff. It could be we are studying a religious symbol, isn't it? Or a cultural symbol, because pyramid shape could be some religious symbols or cultural symbol in some culture. So here, this one image, we could actually get multiple realities that we want to study. Okay, so here I just want to use this image as an example to show you there could be different ontologies. So each reality could be a way of interpreting the ontology. The ontology, sorry. Okay, ontology is about the reality, what the world is, what the reality is. So here, from that image that we've just looked at, one reality could be pyramid, one reality could be stones, or one reality could be religious symbols. So those are different realities. Those could be different ontologies. So depending on what your ontological perception is, or assumption is, or your position is, you could give different answers. Okay, so that is an example of what ontology could be. Okay, the reality, what the thing that you are studying. Okay, and there are two common ontologies and in the research philosophy field. One is called Objectivism, as you can see from the slide. The other one is called Subjectivism. Well, there are others, but these two are the most commonly used ontology or ontological approach or ontological assumption, whatever you call it. These two are the two extremes, actually. And one is objectivism, one is subjectivism. From the word itself, I think you would probably already can guess what they represent for. So objectivism is about an objective reality. So people who believe in objectivism would believe that the reality is objective. So no matter who is studying the same thing, they should observe the same objective reality. Okay, so the researcher itself, like no matter it is me or it is you, that should not make a difference on what we know about the reality. Okay, so it is objective or it is scientific. It doesn't influenced by the researcher, or it doesn't influenced by what language you use to study the object. Okay. And the other way around, the other extreme is subjectivism. So subjectivism is the total opposite of objectivism. Subjectivism is, there is no such thing called a single reality. So there are multiple realities. All the realities are influenced by concept, influenced by context. So the reality does not exist unless they are built on a certain context. For example, built on a geographical context, built on an economical context, or built on a cultural context, etc. So everything has a distortion through the lens of a culture or a power, etc. So you can tell that these two are quite extremely different. Objectivism being quite objective and subjectivism being quite subjective, isn't it? So these two are the two common ontologies in the research field. And you can think about whichever one is more about yourself. So which one you are more kind of a type of person, or you believe more at. Okay, so in my class, I'd like to use a lot of visuals because myself is also a visual learner. So I using visuals for me benefit my learning. So I think it could be good and to bring them up for other visual learners. Okay, so here, this image. Again, I will give you several seconds to look at this image and think, what have you found here and what it is in this image. Okay, that's about 5 seconds. Probably you already have an answer. This image, and can you see a rabbit head? And can you see a duck head? If you can't see either of them, you can probably spend some more time looking at this image. So this is another example of showing you multiple realities. And the reason why I like these multiple realities is myself is if you referring back to these two extremes, myself is more of a subjectivism person. So I believe in multiple realities. I believe it's it is not only one reality, and I think it depends on the way how we interpret a thing, a certain thing. Okay, another image here, and give yourself another 5 seconds to look at this image on what can you find from this image. Okay, that's about 5 seconds. If you want more time, you can pause the video and keep looking at this image. Here, can you see a young lady? This young lady's face is facing the left-hand side, and in about that way, only showing kind of a side of her head. That's a young lady. And can you see an old lady? An old lady who is in about this angle, having out. This is okay, a laser point. Okay, so this old lady, these are her two eyes, and you can see her mouth, her lips is here, and that's her jaw. Okay, right. Okay, so if you are interested in this image, you can, after the class, you can keep searching for some similar graphs for your own interest. Right. So we have talked about ontology, which is study of reality, what the reality is, or what the thing is, what the world is, which is the kind of the ultimate question there. And epistemology is the study of knowledge, or it's the study of how do we know what we know. So for example, on ontology, for example, on the image that the first image that I have shown you on the pyramid. So if you think the ontology, the reality is that image, and is to study pyramid. So under that ontology, the reality, epistemology is how do we know what we know? So how do we know that they are pyramids? Not all triangles are pyramid, isn't it? So how do we know that they are pyramids? Is an example of epistemology. Okay, so how do we know what we know? Or how can we know what we know? Similarly, as we just mentioned about the two extremes of ontology, epistemology also have two extremes. One of the extreme epistemology is positivism or objectivism, and the other one is interpretivism or subjectivism. So they have different name of the terms, but they mean very, very similar. So positivism or objectivism, when they refer as a epistemology, they mean that it is possible to observe the world. So how do we know what the world is? It is possible to observe the world. Okay, so we can observe the world to know what the world is. Okay, so we can observe the world to know this ontology of what the world is. So no matter who observe the world or who observe the reality, and we always observe it in a neutral way. So no matter who, we do not distort the answer of what the world is or what the reality is. So that's the assumption, the epistemological assumption for objectivism. Okay, so the value of the researcher does not influence the outcome of the observation, and we can observe the reality. Okay, that's about objectivism or positivism as in epistemology. And the other extreme on subjectivism or interpretivism as an epistemology and this epistemological approach. And it is that the world is always changing. It is very hard to observe. Okay, it is always changing. And how we know, epistemology is about how we know what we know, right? So how we know that it is a pyramid, how we know about the reality is depending on how we interpret the reality. Okay, so it is not that it is only just one answer or one single reality, whereas here subjectivism or interpretivism believes that it is depend on how we interpret and reality. Many things can influence the interpretation. It could be our cultural understanding or cultural background, or any other background that we have could influence the way how we interpret and reality. Okay, so for example, one behavior in one religion may be regarded as good, or the same behavior in another religion may be regarded as bad. And so here, if you are a interpretivist or subjectivist, you may believe that all the interpretation, all the reality are, can be distorted by the interpretation of the researcher or of their cultural background or of their religious background or their power condition. Okay, right. So these two, I hope they make some sense to you. I know these two concepts, the ontology and epistemology, are very difficult to understand if you don't know them. But hopefully you get some sense. And also after the lecture, I would recommend you to read at least one of the books on the reading list and try to read more about the concepts and try to understand them. And in the books, you may find more examples, more case studies, which would help you to understand these terms. But for now, I hope you have already, started to build some knowledge and some sense of what they are. Okay, right. Here is another image that I like. Here, this image, we can see three heads, isn't it? The three heads, or three bold heads in this image. Well, as what the reality is, we could say that these are heads, human heads, bold heads, but the actual kind of meaning that each head wants to show could be different. For example, the first head could represent a style, a hairstyle, fashion style. Well, the second image could represent an image of a soldier, and a third head could represent the image of a survivor, for example, a survivor from a certain cancer. So again, And I want to use this to show you that there could be different, it could be one reality just had, but we could have different interpretations, isn't it? So that, if you believe that, similar like me, you are more of an interpretivist. Okay, again here, interpretivist or subjectivist like me. So I believe in multiple interpretations on the same reality. Or you could be a positivist or objectivist. So I want to show you this example to help you understand these terms, as well as help you identify what or which philosophical stance that you naturally are, what you are more of. You are more of a, the subjectivism side of a person, or a more of an objectivist. Okay, the third concept, methodology, I assume you already know, or most of you already know or heard of this term, methodology. Methodology is the overarching strategy, okay, and it is influenced by the influenced by the philosophy that you choose. For methodology, the two popular or the commonly used methodology are quantitative methodology and qualitative methodology. Okay, I think you may have already heard of these two terms, quantitative methodology and qualitative methodology, right? So again, think about what kind of, which side you are more naturally is, or you're more kind of fond of. Here, I'd like you to think about the question that I put on the slide. You can see in the slide, in the middle there, bolded, which says, what is the difference between methodology and method? It could be quite obvious, or you have never thought about it. So today is the chance that you think about this question. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. I have a countdown timer here to think about this question, what the difference between methodology and method is. Okay, that's 10 seconds. And if you feel like you need more time, please pause the video and come back after you have finished your own thoughts. All right, the difference between methodology and method. These are the two terms that every year many students mix them up. They are not difficult to understand, but many students tend to mix them up. It's okay if you, in other modules, if you say methodology when you mean method, or if you say method when you mean methodology, other people can also understand. But here, since we are in the very designated module on research methodology, and I'd like you to learn the kind of most accurate knowledge that you can on those terms. So we are actually being maybe a little bit too much, but I hope you are, you can know these difference between these commonly used terms. Well, methodology, compare with method, it is a little bit more abstract than the method. The method is more kind of a practical side of it. The methodology is an overarching strategy, as we said earlier, the most two commonly used methodology are quantitative methodology and qualitative methodology. From the term itself, the quantitative and qualitative, it sounds more abstract than the term that we use for method, isn't it? The method refers to the techniques that we use, the actual techniques that we use to conduct research. The actual techniques commonly used ones are interviews, questionnaires, or experiments. And so these methods are what most, outsiders can easily observe what you're doing there. Like when you are doing a dissertation, they could tell that, okay, you've done some interviews. So those interviews are the techniques, are the most kind of observable element there. Whereas the interview, the kind of overarching strategy behind the interview is the qualitative methodology. Okay, the qualitative methodology is the strategy behind the interview method, and it guides the interview method. Similarly, and behind the qualitative methodology, we also have its ontology and epistemology behind the methodology. As you can remember, that tree trunk, isn't it? So the very, very outside layer, easily to be observable layer, which is the method, like the interviews. So people would notice that you have conducted some interviews for your research, but they probably do not notice is, why you're using the interviews, why interview method would be able to answer your research question, would help you to find an answer for your research question. Okay, so these things in the core are actually guiding the method that you're using. So yeah, put that tree trunk image in your mind. Okay, so I just want to reinforce that image to you. The interview method that you use is guided by the methodology, the qualitative methodology, and is guided by, quite possibly, the interpretivism, epistemology, and subjectivism and ontology. Okay, the 4 layers. They are all related to each other. All right. And if you want to do more, you're welcome to check those textbooks. And for example, that tree trunk is from the sorry, I couldn't pronounce the name. Yeah, Easterby Smith. That book, I put the reference down at the bottom of the slide, so you can have a read of this book and get to know more about this tree trunk. And this one good thing about this book is it is not only the book that you can study from, and they also have a designated online resources, a bank of online resources. So if you Google it or use any other your favorite search engine and put the name of the author and name of the book in your search engine, and you should be able to find its online resources. So they have provided some videos, some case studies, some exercises for you to check how much you've learned about these terms. Okay. All right. Here, before we move to the second part, here I'd like to show you 2 examples of the 2 methodology, the data from 2 methodology. So this is an example of the qualitative methodology data. And this is an example of data from quantitative methodology. Okay. And I'd like you to think about this question. What is the difference between the qualitative data and the quantitative data? Okay, come back again to look at them again, or you can look at your own slides, which you can download from Minerva. The qualitative data example and quantitative data example. So look at these two examples and think about what is the difference between these two types of data. Again, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about this question. Okay, that's 10 seconds. And if you feel like you need more time, please pause the video and come back when you're ready. Okay, let's look at these two examples together. The most obvious difference between the two is that a quantitative data is about numbers, isn't it? The digits, numbers, as you can see from this image in the middle, they all numbers, the ones, twos, or 3, 4, 5, etc. So these are all numbers. Whereas here, no matter they are highlighted or not, they all text, isn't it? They all text or words, sentences, or paragraphs, they all text. So that's the most obvious difference between a qualitative data and a quantitative data. The quantitative data is to study the numbers, whereas a qualitative data is to study the text. But that's quite kind of at surface level, the difference between the two. So for example, this one here, the qualitative data, we know it is qualitative data, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to use a qualitative methodology to analyze this qualitative data. So we could analyze it as the way a qualitative researcher would do by coding these text and trying to find some common message among the different paragraphs. That's the way of like analyzing it in a qualitative way. Whereas we could also analyzing this text data in a quantitative fashion, which we could count. For example, we can count frequencies of a certain word. For example, I want to count the frequency of the word week. So there I could see a week or a day, some days, Friday, Saturday, Monday, etc. So I could count the frequencies. And if you're doing that, you are not actually analyzing this data in a qualitative way, but in a quantitative way, because you are doing something about numbers, isn't it? If you're counting, the result would be a number. So it could be like 10, 50, or even 100. So those are numbers. Or if you are counting the percentage of a certain word, that again, that's numbers. So that's a little bit too far away from. I mean, it's a little bit more depth about qualitative data and quantitative data. But anyway, these I want to show you the difference between these two, the data from the two methodology, qualitative methodology and quantitative methodology. Okay, so that's it of the first part. Hopefully, like you have started to build up your understanding towards these key concepts under the research philosophy, which are ontology, epistemology, methodology. Okay, so these three are usually the key concepts about a research philosophy. And in the second part of the lecture, we will talk about some of the most famous philosophies. I will see you in the next part.